Hey, today I wanted to point out a few things about rearing containers here at salmon hatcheries. Thought it might be helpful to have some video to kind of go along with some of the things we talk about in class. It's not going to be anything professional, but it's kind of a start. So rearing containers come in all different shapes and sizes. Here you see a bunch of circulars. I'm at the Sheldon Jackson hatchery at the moment. I can show you a few things here, and then I'm going to head on out to the Sawmill Creek hatchery, but they kind of have a lot of things in common, but there's also quite a few differences. If I get up close to this one, can you see these circular tanks happen to be made out of fiberglass? And so, we talked about how like incubators and plumbing and whatnot all have to be made out of some kind of non-toxic material. Certainly fiberglass fits in that category. They actually make molded plastic of some. I'll show you some little ones over here. Make them out of molded plastic. I've seen concrete circular tanks. I've seen them built into the ground. I've seen them above the ground. Boy, just about every shape and size you can imagine, in a variety of materials. And a lot of that just depends, it depends on a lot of things. Cost is one thing. Where you're going to put it. A lot of places concrete's just really, really cheap. But if you think about it, it's a little tough to work on, right? To modify it. And my experience tells me that you're always wanting to punch a hole here, punch a hole there, or do something different. So, yeah. And you can see these ones have a variety of holes in them, and over the years they've really been modified quite a bit. And these tanks are older, they're settling quite a bit, which is not so great for fiberglass. And you got to prepare the bed real well because they'll bend, unlike concrete. But of course concrete has its drawbacks too. So you can imagine shapes and sizes, different materials and stuff. Couple basic things that you see in all containers is screened inlets and screened outlets. So the water here is coming in this pipe right here, and see it has a valve with no handle on it because this tank is actually kind of out of commission and drained right now. But you can see these others here have some valving and whatnot. This is the size of the piping going in really totally dictates how much water flow you're going to get. In this particular hatchery, the water source is Indian River, and it's a real low head, so there's not a lot of height difference between where the Indian River intake is and this hatchery. So there's not a lot of pressure in these lines, and actually these things weren't really made very well because these tanks and this plumbing especially, or at least it wasn't made for producing a lot of fish, because it's only got a 4-inch, actually I think it's only a 3-inch pipe coming in. So if you wanted to get more water in here, you really need higher diameter because you just don't have the pressure. If there was a lot of pressure behind this, that 3 or 4-inch line might work just fine. But the incoming water up at Indian River has a screened intake, and I'll show you some of that here in just a few minutes. I'll go over and show you how the intake is protected. But you want to keep out wild salmon. You want to keep out too much debris from getting in your pipes, of course. Just plug them up, right? And so there's a lot of things you want to keep out. Anything wild, really, for disease purposes. So you got to, you don't see it here, but this intake is screened, okay? And then screened outlets. So here in a circular tank, as you can imagine, the water goes around and around. I'll try and show you this one over here. I don't want to get too close because it'll drown out my voice. But you can see how this water is going around in a circular pattern, and much like a toilet, kind of hate to use that example, but let's face it, fish poop, and that's where it's going, down the drain. It's a circular motion, so you get this centrifugal motion going around and down through that center drain, which you can see quite well here. For little fish, you'd put in different size screens, right? So bigger fish, bigger screens. You want the screen opening as big as you can possibly get it to allow poop to go through really readily. Mortalities are going to get pulled onto that screen. Any kind of debris that you might have is going to go onto that screen too. And once these things are full, as you can imagine, it's a little tough to get in there and deal with that screen. Unlike some vertical or some horizontal raceways, which I'll show you later, they're really quite accessible. So kind of different that way, circulars are. Another kind of neat thing about circulars I'll show you right now, since we're right here, is you could adjust that pipe. You can adjust that pipe over there. Imagine if you angle it up just a little bit, up so it's more parallel with the water surface, it would increase the circular flow in that tank. So you can kind of do that. It's a great thing about circular tanks. And I know at the William Jack Hernandez hatchery in Anchorage, they actually put a piece of pipe, see where the water's coming out there, they put a piece of pipe on there that goes down to the bottom, and it has holes punched in it, so it distributes the water even more. And then they can angle that a little bit too. Angle it in towards the center, it decreases the flow. Angle it out towards the edge, and it increases the flow. And there's a variety of reasons you might want to do that. So that's flow characteristics, and the big difference between circular and rectangular is the way it flows. So circulars are usually going to flow on a pretty circular pattern, of course. Nice thing, a really great thing about that is it does act like a toilet and gets all the poop down there, whereas the horizontal raceways, it's a little bit more challenging. We'll talk about that later. Let's see, what else? I got some notes here I want to work with. As far as dividing fish up, I think with the circulars, normally what you're going to do, so sometimes like when little guys, they aren't taking up a lot of space, there's a lot of reasons you might want to have little fish. I'll tell you what, I'm going to walk over towards the small containers while I'm talking here. The little fish, a lot of times you want them in a fairly small container because they're learning how to eat. Okay, and the other thing I found, like with little fish, is that they're going to eat and they're going to poop a lot. A lot of times there's a lot of uneaten feed because they are learning, and so it's nice to have them in a more controlled or kind of a smaller container. And so with circulars, I think what most people do is kind of like what I'm going to show you here is there's some smaller type circular tanks you might want to put them in, or maybe they're in a small rectangular tank initially, and then you move them into something bigger. I'll show you some of these smaller containers over here. So the other thing, with rectangular tanks, you might have sections in there, and I'll show you that when we get to some rectangular tanks here later on. So these are some of the smaller tanks that the hatchery manager just bought. This is an example of something you might. These are kind of neat because they're made out of a different kind of material. This is just a molded plastic here, and so got a pretty small guy here, and this is probably more for research. But if you had little guys coming out and they were just starting, and mind you, they're not real strong, you might put them in a small tank like this where you could feed them really well, you could keep things cleaned up, and you could really control the flow. So kind of nice that way. Let's see, talk about access a little bit. Accessing, I'm going to walk back over here. And so to access these containers, it's nice to be able to get all the way around them. Not everybody has that advantage, but nice to be able to get all the way around them so you can clean, pick more, see how they're eating, observe them a little bit. So that's another characteristic you might be looking at. And that's about it. I'll tell you what, I'm going to walk over here and show you the screened intake. It's quite loud, so all I can really do is provide some video.